Well, 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 you know, my friend, they watched you for months. Silently, patiently, not like the clumsy surveillance you see in movies. No, this was surgical, clean, cold. They mapped your behavior patterns, your searches, your sleepless nights, the way you stopped responding to distractions, the way you moved differently, like someone who doesn't care for the circus anymore. And then, something clicked. You stopped fitting in. You stopped feeding the algorithm. You became an anomaly in a system built to predict chaos. See, the world doesn't fear destruction. It fears unpredictability. And you were no longer predictable. You started doing strange things. You read books till your eyes burned. You deleted the apps that sedated your mind. You stopped reacting to their bait. They gave you dopamine traps, likes, reels, swipes, stories, and you walked past them like they were corpses on the street. You weren't supposed to do that. You were supposed to scroll, supposed to laugh, supposed to obey the rhythm, but you didn't. You broke the rhythm, and that's when you made it onto the list. The CIA didn't say it out loud, but the signal was clear. You're a potential threat, not because you carry a weapon, not because you post cryptic messages, but because you stopped being a slave, because you became aware. You saw the strings, and worse, you stopped dancing. You see, in a world full of noise, silence is violence. When a man no longer craves approval, when his eyes stop flickering for validation, when his mind becomes still like a predator before the kill, that's when the agencies pay attention. Because someone who isn't distracted is dangerous. Someone who thinks is dangerous. Someone who questions is radioactive. They called it behavioral deviation. What it really means is you remembered who you were before they put their fingers in your brain. They trained you since childhood. Slowly, sugar in your cereal, heroes on your screen, noise in your ears. They gave you a routine: school, job, taxes, screen, sleep, repeat. They taught you how to chase shadows. But then, you stopped chasing. You stood still. You looked at the system. And instead of clapping, you asked why. And that is when the alert went out. A human being, fully awake, is a glitch in their matrix. Someone who doesn't fear being alone. Someone who doesn't beg for entertainment. Someone who stares into the silence and doesn't flinch. That kind of person is too wild to predict, too raw to be packaged, too real to be sold. They've been watching your screen time. It dropped. Your consumption slowed. Your mind began creating instead of consuming. You weren't scrolling anymore. You were studying. You weren't buying anymore. You were building. Your thoughts no longer followed the script. You questioned trends. You challenged dogmas. You asked why weakness was normalized and why mediocrity was being celebrated. And when you didn't laugh along with the crowd, they flagged you. Because obedience is the true currency of this age. Not money, not status, but obedience, silent submission. The moment you become unpredictable, even slightly, you become suspicious. You weren't supposed to get this far. You weren't supposed to break through. And yet here you are. You walked past the dopamine cages, past the clickbait, past the influencers peddling emptiness. You didn't look for shortcuts. You looked for war. You signed up for suffering like a man who knows that pain is the password to power. That's when they labeled you. Not a threat to society, a threat to the system, a threat to the framework designed to keep everyone numb. You started taking cold showers. You stopped eating like a child. You started journaling your demons. You started reading psychology. You watched your own mind like an outsider. You saw your fear, your lust, your envy, your pride. You didn't deny it, you studied it. You started understanding how humans are manipulated, and worse, you started resisting it. You turned off the music. You embraced the silence. You faced the voices, and you didn't run. Most people, they beg for distractions, but you sat in the dark. You stared at your wounds, and instead of covering them with noise, you picked at them. You asked, why am I this way? Who made me this way? Who benefits from my weakness? And the system trembled. They weren't scared of you when you were angry. They were scared of you when you became focused, calm, cold, intentional. Because anger is noisy, it's predictable. But clarity is lethal. You started waking up early, sleeping less, complaining less, eating cleaner, moving with purpose. Your phone became a tool, not a toy. Your room became a sanctuary, not a trash bin. You spoke less, observed more. And when people mocked your discipline, you didn't flinch. You had become sovereign. That word alone, sovereignty, is banned in subtle ways. They want you addicted, confused, seeking something, always needing, never still, never whole. But now, you had nothing to prove. You weren't looking for love in pixels. You weren't chasing meaning in memes. You were building something ancient, something forbidden, self-control. And in that moment, when the machine couldn't guess your next move, they knew you were becoming free. Freedom is a crime in a world built on control. You weren't raging, you weren't rioting, you were simply detaching from the games, from the fake goals, from the virtual cages. They saw you unsubscribing, logging out, pulling away, and they labeled you with one word: threat. You started seeking truth, not trends, depth, not dopamine. You walked into the discomfort. You shut the noise. You embraced the loneliness like a crown. You didn't chase women. You chased mastery. You didn't look for motivation. You built momentum. You became a storm, but not the kind that destroys buildings, the kind that awakens minds. You started to realize the truth, the ugly, twisted truth, that most people are living inside scripts they didn't write, desires they didn't choose, opinions they didn't test, lives they didn't build. But you weren't most people anymore. You looked at the mirror and didn't see a reflection. You saw a question, and that's when it all changed. The notifications stopped. The world felt quieter. But you knew it wasn't peace. It was observation. They weren't ignoring you. They were studying you. Because when a man becomes silent, but his eyes grow sharper, they know he's building something. Not an empire, a revolution. And the terrifying part? It starts inside his own mind. But revolutions don't go unnoticed forever. Not in a world where even your heartbeat is data. So when you start moving against the grain, not loudly, not violently, but with quiet precision, you trigger something deeper, something older. You step into a war you never declared. A war not fought with bullets, but beliefs. Not with blood, but programming. And you? You've entered the battlefield without armor, because no one told you it was war. But look around. Everything is weaponized. Language, pleasure, comfort, even kindness. What looks harmless is often the most lethal, because they don't kill you with violence anymore. They kill you with convenience. Every smooth surface you touch, every tap, every notification, every artificial smile, It's not just a distraction, it's a muzzle. They tried to make you forget. Not just facts, but instincts. The instinct to resist, to fight, to protect your own thoughts like territory. But you remembered. You started guarding your mental space like a soldier in hostile terrain. You questioned offers that came too easy. You looked behind every curtain. You didn't just refuse the lies, you started dissecting them. They call it paranoia. But you know what paranoia really is? It's pattern recognition, sharpened. It's what happens when your senses start working again, when the static dies down, and you start hearing the gears behind the show. The show they call reality. You saw how every choice had been designed for you in advance. The food, the goals, the ideologies. Even your dreams were pre-selected. But you burned the script. You stopped repeating what they taught you. You no longer shared opinions like hand-me-downs. You began sculpting your own perspective, piece by jagged piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was yours. And in a world of copies, originality is offensive. Because every original mind is a mirror. It reflects the artificiality around it. And that reflection makes people uncomfortable. You didn't argue anymore. You observed. You realized truth doesn't scream. It waits. You stopped feeding debates that were designed to burn time. You stopped defending yourself to people who were programmed to misunderstand. You walked away, not in retreat, but in dominance. Because silence from a self-aware man isn't absence, it's power. That's when they escalated. You started noticing the new waves. The manipulation got more refined, less obvious. They no longer attacked you, they seduced you. With luxury, with validation, with voices that pretended to empower you while caging your thinking. You weren't being chained. You were being comforted into stagnation. And stagnation in this war is defeat. But you stayed moving. You trained your body not just for strength, but for rebellion. Every push-up was defiance. Every fast was a rejection of dependence. Every controlled breath was you reclaiming authority over the machine you live inside. You didn't pursue aesthetics. You pursued function, precision, utility. You weren't building a body for mirrors. You were building a weapon for life. The transformation wasn't external. It was molecular. The kind of change that alters the rhythm of your presence. People sensed it. They couldn't explain it. They just started reacting differently. Some kept distance. Others got irritated. The system wants you likable, not formidable. You were becoming the latter. And the world, even those close to you, started flinching at your evolution. You weren't easy to digest anymore. That's what happens when a man starts living on principle instead of impulse. You stop negotiating your values for acceptance. You stopped sugarcoating your words for fragile egos. You stood tall in rooms where conformity was the price of entry. And when you refused to bow, they didn't confront you. They tried to ignore you. Because your existence was loud enough. But they couldn't ignore you forever. You began influencing without trying, without followers, without a platform, just by existing differently, by making discipline look natural, by making clarity look dangerous. You didn't inspire with words, you infected with presence. You carried truth like a virus. And those still plugged into the system felt it like a fever they couldn't name. So the system responded, not with force, with overload. They sent more content, more distractions, more trends. They flooded your space with meaningless options, not to convert you, but to exhaust you. They know that most revolutions die, not by opposition, but by fatigue. But you had trained for this. You had built stamina, not just of the body, but of the mind. You had learned how to protect your attention, like currency, how to retreat into silence without feeling lost. You weren't escaping, you were reloading, strategizing, watching the patterns shift, waiting for the next blind spot to appear, and then it did. You saw how fear was being repackaged, how guilt was weaponized into virtue, how shame became a leash. You saw it in movements, in slogans, in artificially loud compassion. You saw how division was manufactured, how people were turned against each other with different flavors of the same poison. You didn't pick sides. You didn't chant. You studied the source of the chaos. And once again, they couldn't classify you. Because nothing scares a controlled system more than someone who doesn't play the game. You weren't driven by rage. You were driven by design. You weren't seeking destruction. You were building an alternative blueprint, slowly, patiently, one decision at a time. Your life became your statement, not loud, not branded, just real. And in this illusion factory, reality is radioactive. You started finding others, not many, just a few. Men and women who carried that same strange energy, who had cut through the noise, who didn't fit, who didn't scroll, who didn't speak unless it mattered. You didn't form a tribe, you formed a signal, a quiet resistance, not with slogans, but standards, not with promises, but with presence. And slowly, something terrifying happened. You began imagining a world outside their design. Not utopia, not fantasy, just a world where truth wasn't filtered, where strength wasn't demonized, where attention wasn't farmed, where humans weren't data points, but conscious agents. And that vision, even unspoken, was the most dangerous act of all. Because every regime fears imagination. You didn't need to protest. You didn't need to destroy. You just needed to exist, day after day, without becoming one of them, without bending, without being absorbed. Your resistance was spiritual, existential. It wasn't loud, it was deliberate. And that was enough to trigger their next move. They'll send people now, not with badges, with smiles, with ideas, with trends, with curated words that feel like truth. They'll invite you to soften, to come back, to share, to belong. But what they're really offering is anesthesia. Because consciousness, raw, unfiltered consciousness, hurts in their world. You've made it too far. You've built too much momentum to stop now. But understand this. The next phase is colder, quieter. You'll face yourself in darker mirrors. You'll walk through mazes built from your own desires. This isn't about the system anymore. This is about whether you can lead yourself without applause, whether you can walk alone without resentment, whether you can stay awake when no one's watching, because that's the final test. And it's already begun. You'll feel it soon, not as fear, but friction. Subtle, internal, a restlessness that isn't from fatigue, but from evolution. The kind of pressure that doesn't crush, it carves. And in that carving, you'll be asked a question no machine can understand, no algorithm can answer. Who are you when nothing is left to fight but yourself? When the enemy no longer wears a uniform, but hides inside your thoughts, disguised as hesitation, as comfort, as the silent whisper that tells you to wait. Just a little longer. This is where most disappear. Not by defeat, but by delay. Because the final trap isn't resistance, it's stillness. A subtle, soft death that feels like peace, but eats you from within. This is the crucible where illusions are stripped bare. You'll come face to face with the parts of you that once protected you, the need to be liked, the urge to stay safe, the hunger for recognition. They served you once, but now they must die. Not with violence, but with choice. You'll have to choose again and again to let go of what no longer belongs in your future. That's the quiet agony of becoming more, sacrificing versions of yourself that you once called home. You start to see that freedom isn't just the absence of chains. It's the discipline to walk past open doors without stepping in. Every desire is a test, every temptation a mirror, not of what you want, but of what still controls you. The world will still try to offer you shortcuts, rewards, applause. But once you've seen what they're made of, you can't pretend anymore. You can't unsee the strings behind the stage. So you detach, not in bitterness, but in clarity. You stop chasing echoes. You stop responding to noise. You start moving with purpose, even when the path disappears. Because now, you navigate by internal compass, a code that doesn't bend, even when everything around you does. That code becomes your anchor, not to hold you down, but to keep you upright when the storm gets louder, and it will. The storm always returns, not as chaos, but in subtler forms. You'll feel it in your relationships, in the tension between who you were and who you're becoming. You'll feel the weight of your own silence, the echo of your own solitude. But you'll also feel something else, an unfamiliar stillness, the kind that doesn't beg for distraction, the kind that doesn't need escape. That's the beginning of power. Not power over others, but over yourself. You'll notice you speak less, but your words carry more weight. You'll see how quickly you can read a room, not to manipulate, but to measure truth. You'll realize that most people aren't speaking, they're bleeding, desperate to be heard, even if they don't know what they're saying. But you've gone quiet for too long to play that game. Your silence is no longer passive, it's calibrated. You walk into spaces now with presence, not noise, and the room adjusts. That's what they fear, not the loud ones, not the rebels with signs, but the ones who've gone invisible by choice, who've mastered restraint, who've turned themselves into something sharper than anger, clarity. Because clarity doesn't need to argue. It cuts, quietly, cleanly, and the system has no defense against it. But clarity has a price. It costs you the right to pretend. You can no longer unknow the patterns. You can't shrink back into ignorance. You can't join the crowd without feeling the weight of your own betrayal. You become allergic to mediocrity. You lose the ability to tolerate shallow conversations, empty rituals, synthetic emotion. And in that rejection, you become a foreign entity. You weren't meant to blend in. You weren't built for consensus. You were forged in friction, molded by isolation, designed to carry a different frequency, one that scrambles the programming in others. Your existence alone forces recalibration. People either evolve near you or retreat. There is no neutral. You've become a tuning fork for truth, and not everyone is ready for the sound. But you didn't come here to be understood. You came here to build, to create what doesn't exist yet, to lay foundations for a future that isn't corrupted by comfort. You begin to channel the chaos. You take the pain, the loneliness, the confusion, and you sculpt with it. You become a living architecture of everything the world told you was impossible. And now, they're watching. The same ones who doubted you, who mocked your silence, who called your intensity too much. They're beginning to sense it, that you've crossed a threshold they can't follow, that you didn't just change your routine, you rewired your identity. You became sovereign. And sovereignty isn't loud, it's lethal, because a sovereign man is uncontrollable. He doesn't need their systems, their validation, their labels. He doesn't react, he responds. He doesn't argue, he moves. He doesn't cling, he releases. And that terrifies them, because control only works on those still starving for approval. You've outgrown that hunger. You feast on solitude now, on clarity, on fire. You're not angry, you're awake. And you know the final truth, that the real war was never out there. It was always inside. The enemy wasn't a politician or a corporation. It was the part of you that believed you were powerless. The voice that said you had to obey, that you had to wait, that you had to be less, feel less, want less. You silenced that voice, not with noise, but with action. You became what they said you couldn't. You endured what was meant to break you. You rebuilt your mind brick by brutal brick until it became a fortress. And now you don't need to be told you're dangerous. You already know. You've become the anomaly they can't model, the variable they can't predict, the glitch they can't patch. You've left the simulation, not with a scream, but with a step. And now that you're out, you see it all. How deep the programming runs, how scared they are of stillness, how allergic they are to silence. Because in silence, the truth echoes. And in truth, there is no control, only choice. You made yours, long ago, quietly, permanently. And now you walk alone, not in exile, but in elevation. No badge, no flag, no anthem, just presence, just fire, just eyes that no longer blink when faced with falsehood. You're not waiting for a sign. You are the sign. You're not looking for the way. You are the way. You're not asking for permission. You're the proof. And they know it now. That's why they classified you. That's why they buried your name behind code. That's why they monitor your movement. Not because you're violent, not because you're loud, but because you became what they feared most, a man who woke up.